In Georgian scholarly area, the poetry of Kalandadze is pursued in an attempt of liberation of poetic discourse from the Soviet political pressure and influences. Kalandadze is the first Georgian female poet whose work, according to the individual characteristics, stylistic and linguistic peculiarities, is in tune with the work of her contemporary Western poetesses and is no inferior to them. Kalandadze is the first woman author who attracted the attention of literary critics. In her poetry, the individuality of the lyrical self is highlighted, whereas the solitude of the lyrical self is a result of the thoughtful act. Roses are left with drops of rain. The road is also wet after rain. I am working in a garden like a pilgrim of a desert, and the ladybird, who knows where she is? The world rendered in Kalandadze's poems is intimate, full of individual experiences and feelings, being at the same time as it were clear and familiar to everyone. In Kalandadze's work, aesthetic expertness acquires universal character, which is manifest in the fact that it demonstrates something unexpressed, incoherent so far, points to a certain state. In particular, the poems express protest against the social state, human collageness, and losing contact with the one's parts, roots, identity. The author herself notes that injustice evokes a sense of protest, and the sense of protest generates new lines. Hence, as a counterbalance to the actual word of the author, in the poem such a word is depicted where everything is differently. The present and the past are interchangeable. This helps the poet to stand apart from the social time and introduce the divine alternative temporal dimension, which, unlike the earthly time, is neither divided nor transits. The poet constructs an alternative area, the subject of which is totally different from the model of the Soviet human being. She is sensitive, dreamy, solitary, and confused. Sequoia and old oak are standing old giants. The sky is that of chrysanthemum. What is camellia? Now adding the fire in the heart. More fire. The sky is that of hydrangea. The sea is that of hydrangea. The sun is chrysanthemum. The action conveyed in the poems is often cognitive and related to the inner world and mental states of the lyrical self. Hence, the changes occurring in it, its reflection, wishes, fears, and perception, and the mental activity reflects the world perceived by the lyrical self. Between the lines of the poems, you can read the fear of isolation, tearing off, loss of integrity of the soul. Whereas the consolation and refuge often appears Christianity, because Christianity in Kalandadze's work is associated with the stable moral values and cannot be influenced by ideological and social historical changes. Such values are philanthropy, healing power of love, care for social welfare, salvation of people. The language in the poetry of Kalandadze is a tool for expression of experiences, which is transformed by the author. In the condition of universal collectivization, every act of manifestation of individuality was perceived as a means directed against the ideology. For a woman, it was twice as difficult to discover herself, as the importance of the historical role of woman was added to the real context. A possibility of self-discovery for Kalandadze became the feminine language, which implies womanly, consequently imaginary. By means of activation of imagination, Kalandadze imparted to a language a cultural power by means of metaphorical, metonymical feminine lines, elliptical language, palimpsest and aposiopesis stylistic device exert a powerful influence on readers, endowing texts with multiple meanings. I think by this method, the author saved the language system from petrifying in the totalitarian period. It is noteworthy that the lyrical self, or the subject of the text, constructs around herself a subjective, spatial, and temporal dimension which we may call experience time and experience space. The pursued space is often familiar, beautiful, native, and archetypal, being related to the national consequences. The cultural archetypes used in the poems include Merane, Queen Tamar, Lelai, Vaja, Saint Nino, Queen Ketewan, and others. In the conditions of the totalitarian regime, forgetting the past represents a condition of retaining social stability, and the Soviet ideology obliges people to strive only towards the future. In this situation, Anna Kalandadze, through the images of the past, begins to revive the collective memory, so necessary and important at the period, as the identity of a nation depends exactly on the narrative existing in its collective memory. Here was born Suliko. The sun flew Merani, and even it had invaded the enemy, fierce and dimmed. Aluda would have cut off his right hand, would have Lelai allowed him to get away with it. Thus, Anna Kalandadze, in this way, creates and exists of national consequences in the Soviet area, and by means of rending and recalling historical figures, historical events, folk myths, religious allusions, activates the national memory. Naturally, this was ideologically unjustifiable and unacceptable for the life defined by the so-called progressive ideas. Therefore, by this act, Anna Kalandadze arose almost atrophied characteristics in the national discourse. On the one hand, she facilitated highlighting the importance of the national identity, disruption of the Soviet narrative by the national narrative, and on the other hand, through the feminine language made possible in the patriarchal words, immediate rendering on feelings, aspirations, and intimate emotional experiences, which in feminist literary criticism is referred to as writing with one's eyes closed. Liberation of the cultural, symbolic order of the unconscious from the pressure. Around my hand is flying with the radiant soul, my butterfly, looking for my flower, having joy to announce. I turn away from her instead of the suns, looking for the darks. But tell me, is possible impossible?